When Natalie said, "Keeping us together isn't my job," Jacob thought it was just another bad day. But those words became the silent earthquake that shattered everything. What happens when the one you love stops seeing you? And what if their wake-up call comes too late? Jacob used to think love was mostly maintenance. Regular check-ins, shared routines, quiet Sundays. Not glamorous, not dramatic, just steady. And for a while that was enough. Then one morning, somewhere between the sound of eggs sizzling and the tap of rain against the window, Natalie shattered that illusion. "You know keeping us together isn't my job, right?" she said, setting her coffee down mid-sip. Jacob froze, spatula in hand, eggs still cooking. The words hit harder than if she'd yelled. There was no anger in her voice, just finality, like she'd been waiting to say it, rehearsing it. She didn't slam the door when she left the room. She didn't need to. The silence that followed said everything. It had started small, missed grocery runs, unspoken irritations, evenings spent scrolling on opposite sides of the couch. Nothing explosive. No fights, no cheating, just a slow fade. But that morning, something shifted, or maybe it broke. Jacob didn't go after her. He didn't ask what she meant. He just stood there, watching the eggs burn. That was the beginning of the end, or at least the end of how things had been. Jacob didn't stop being present. He still paid the bills, still ran errands, still came home on time, but the warmth drained out of the routine. He stopped suggesting date nights. He stopped asking what she wanted for dinner. The little gestures, flowers on Fridays, playlists for road trips, disappeared. Natalie didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't say anything. Their apartment became a kind of limbo. Conversations shrank to logistics. Eye contact faded. Touch became accidental. Once their mornings were filled with music and banter. Now it was just the hum of the refrigerator and two people avoiding the same spaces. Jacob didn't know what he was waiting for. Maybe a confrontation, maybe a confession, but none came. Just quiet, and it was terrifying how easy it was to live like strangers. He started spending more time at the gym, then picked up extra shifts at work. It wasn't about ambition, it was about escape. People would ask why he was working so much. He'd shrug and say he was just focused. The truth was, there was nothing to rush home to. The few times he did get home early, Natalie was either half asleep on the couch or immersed in her phone. Once she made orange juice from scratch and left it on the counter. Another time, she folded his laundry and placed it neatly on the bed. But Jacob didn't respond to the gestures. He wasn't sure they meant anything. Were they guilt, habit, or was she trying, very quietly, to fix what she'd ignored? Whatever it wasn't enough. He'd catch her glancing at him sometimes, watching him from the hallway as he got ready for the gym. But when their eyes met, she always looked away. Jacob didn't feel angry. He felt invisible. And that was worse. He stopped trying to win her back. Not because he stopped loving her, but because love had started to feel like a one-sided conversation. He had spent too long initiating, too long hoping. Now he was too tired to keep pulling the weight alone. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. No fight, no slam doors. It happened in a break room at work. A co-worker, Darren, invited him out for drinks. "Nah," Jacob said. "I'm married." Darren smirked. "It's just a beer, man." Jacob didn't even look up. "I'm married, but alone." The words came out before he could stop them. They were quiet, but honest. Darren paused, nodded like he understood something deeper than he'd expected, and didn't push. What Jacob didn't know was that Natalie had stopped by his work that night. He'd left his gym bag in her car that morning. She dropped it off, didn't say anything, didn't come inside. But she heard what he said. When Jacob got home, the bag was by the door. Zipped, clean, untouched. She never mentioned it. That night, he found her sitting on the bedroom floor with an old photo album. Their wedding. Trips, early memories. He hadn't seen that album in years. She didn't speak, just flipped through pages like trying to remember who they used to be. Jacob stood in the doorway watching her. She looked like someone trying to find her way back to a place that might not exist anymore. He didn't sit beside her. He didn't know if he could. For the first time in their marriage, It wasn't just distance between them, it was realization. Something was finally clicking for her. But for Jacob, it was already too late to be hopeful. At least for now. She climbed into bed hours later, quietly. He didn't move. Her breathing was too even to be sleep. She was awake, lying next to him, holding back whatever it was she couldn't say out loud. And Jacob, staring at the ceiling, knew the line between them wasn't just emotional anymore. It was a boundary neither of them had the courage to cross. Not yet. The next few weeks passed in silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind that settles in when both people stop asking questions. Natalie still left folded laundry on Jacob's side of the bed, still put out his coffee mug each morning. But now Jacob didn't even pretend to interpret these gestures. They felt like routines with no meaning, motions without intent. At work, Jacob added more hours, took on every Saturday shift. He started running farther, lifting heavier. Every drop of sweat became a substitute for a conversation they weren't having. But inside, he wasn't angry. He was numb. And he began to wonder if numbness was worse, because it doesn't push you to fix things. It convinces you it's not worth it. Then came the night he came home late from work. The apartment was dark, except for the hallway light. Natalie was asleep on the couch, wrapped in his old blanket. The TV screen was paused on an old sitcom they used to watch together. She hadn't even made it to bed. Jacob stood in the doorway, watching her for longer than he should have. She looked smaller. Not sad exactly. Just not herself, like someone who had run out of ways to speak. He didn't wake her. The next morning, she didn't ask where he'd been, didn't mention falling asleep on the couch. She just moved through the day like everything was fine. That night, she made pancakes, blueberry, her favorite, not his. He walked into the kitchen to find them on a plate, warm, ready. She stood nearby, not speaking. He sat, ate them silently. They were good, better than he remembered, but that wasn't the point. Blueberry, he said. They were on sale, she replied. That was the first full sentence they'd exchanged in days. He rinsed his plate and placed it in the dishwasher. She didn't stop him, didn't ask for more. But something in her posture shifted, like she was waiting, hoping. He grabbed his keys and said, "Going to the gym." Her quiet okay came with a voice crack that betrayed her stillness. When he came home hours later, the kitchen was spotless. Her plate was still by the sink, untouched. The effort was there, but Jacob couldn't meet her halfway. Not yet. He needed her to sit with the silence she had once ignored. Natalie started trying harder, not loudly, not with speeches or apologies, but through action. She played music while she cooked. She left out an old board game they used to play. Once she lit a candle he used to like and placed it by the couch. Jacob noticed everything, and he ignored everything. He wasn't trying to punish her. He just didn't know how to respond. The emotional cost of always being the one to bridge the gap had caught up with him. Then came the night he got out of the shower and saw her folding laundry on the bed. She wasn't rushing. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately. He stood in the doorway, unsure whether to speak. She broke the silence. "I saw you turn down Darren's invite. At work." Jacob's face stayed still. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. She'd heard him say the words. "I'm married but alone." Natalie placed the last shirt in the drawer, then turned toward him. She sat down with her legs folded beneath her like she used to do when things were good. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. "I didn't know you felt that alone." He stayed by the door. I don't know what I thought," she whispered. "That you'd always keep showing up, that if I got cold, you'd come closer." She took a few tentative steps toward him. "I'm sorry, Jacob." His name from her mouth sounded different now, less familiar, more fragile. "I didn't see what you were carrying," she said. "I thought love meant being there when I needed you. I didn't think about when you needed me." Jacob's jaw tightened. His hands were at his sides, not clenched, not open. He hadn't expected this. Not now. Not like this. She reached out and brushed his fingers. "That line," she said, swallowing hard. "I'm married but alone." I haven't stopped hearing it. The silence that followed was heavy, but for once it wasn't empty. It was full of things finally being acknowledged. "I never meant for it to get like this," she whispered. I never thought you'd stop trying. Jacob studied her face, but this time he saw something new. Not just regret, but understanding. She was no longer trying to rewind. She was finally trying to see him. I regret thinking love was a one-way effort, she added, stepping closer. I thought I had all the time in the world. She reached for him, slow and cautious. When her arms wrapped around him, he didn't pull away. Her forehead rested against his chest and her body trembled once, as if that single gesture cost her more than words ever could. Jacob let his hands rest on her back, not out of forgiveness, not yet, but out of recognition. Something had changed, and maybe, just maybe, this time it would matter. They stood there for a long time. No music, no talking, just breath, contact, and something wordless returning to the space between them. He wasn't ready to forget everything that had happened, but for the first time in months he wasn't sure he needed to. The next morning, Jacob woke up to the smell of pancakes again. Same blueberries, same quiet setup. This time, Natalie didn't hover. She was already in the living room, phone in hand, pretending not to watch. He ate slowly, thoughtfully, then rinsed his plate, left it on the rack, and walked past her without a word. Not out of coldness, out of uncertainty. He still didn't know how much of this was real and how much was temporary guilt. But something was changing. Each day after that, she added a small detail. She'd text him a photo of something funny from their past. Ask how work was, offer to walk with him to the grocery store. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't beg for forgiveness, but she started showing up in ways she hadn't in months. Jacob noticed, but didn't respond right away. He needed time, not because he didn't want her back, but because he didn't trust what this was yet. He'd spent too long holding the relationship up on his own. If they were going to fix anything, it had to be mutual, consistent. Then one Friday night, she asked him to sit on the balcony with her. It had once been their favorite spot. Now it was just a memory. He hesitated, but followed. They sat in silence at first. She didn't rush it. She just looked at the street below, the people walking by, the ordinary things. Finally, she said, I've been thinking about that night, the one where I said it wasn't my job to keep us together. Jacob didn't answer. I didn't mean it the way it sounded, she continued. I was tired, frustrated, but it doesn't matter how I meant it. What matters is that I said it and that I believed it, even for a second. He stayed quiet. She kept going. You stopped trying after that, and I don't blame you. I think part of me wanted to see what would happen if you did. Jacob turned toward her now, slowly. And? I hated it, she said, eyes still forward. I thought if you stopped, I'd feel free. But I just felt empty. He exhaled slowly. That's what I felt long before I stopped. She nodded. I know. I see that now. She pulled out the photo album again that night. This time she invited him to sit with her. He did. Page by page, they went through their early years. He expected it to hurt, to remind him of how far they drifted, but instead it reminded him why he'd fought for so long in the first place. Their wedding, the road trip to Colorado, the camping trip where they ran out of gas and laughed for hours waiting for help. None of those moments felt fake. None of them felt forced, and that gave him pause. She turned to him at one point. I want to earn back the version of you who looked at me like I mattered, not because you're obligated to love me, but because I want to be someone worth loving again. That night, Jacob didn't sleep right away. He watched her breathe beside him, steady and soft, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a ghost in his own marriage. But it wasn't the pancakes or photo albums that turned things. It was the following Tuesday. Jacob came home late from a shift, tired, aching. When he walked in, Natalie was on the floor, surrounded by papers. She'd printed out old emails they'd written to each other, back when they were dating. Some were jokes, some were long paragraphs about nothing, but they were real. I found them on my old Gmail account, she said. I forgot how much we used to talk. He looked down at the paper she held out to him. It was an email from the week after their second anniversary. He'd written a list of reasons he loved her. 53 reasons to be exact, some big, some ridiculous, like the way she laughed at her own jokes, the way she'd argue about movie endings like they were life or death. I read these, she said, and realized I haven't been that person in a long time. She placed the email in his hand. And I wondered if you missed her, or if you missed who you were when you were with her. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. She was finally saying what he'd been thinking for months. She took a deep breath. I want us to matter again, but I know that's not up to just me. I can't rebuild this alone, and I can't ask you to forget everything I didn't do. Jacob stared at the page in his hand. 53 reasons. And somehow, even now, most of them still felt true. I never needed you to be perfect, he said quietly. I just needed to not feel invisible. Natalie's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. She nodded slowly, like someone accepting a consequence, not fighting it. That night, they sat on the floor for hours, not talking about the future, not making promises, just sitting, reading, remembering. It wasn't a romantic moment, it wasn't clean or easy, but it was honest, and it was the first time since everything fell apart that they shared a space without avoiding the truth. Later, as they got up to turn off the lights, Natalie touched his hand gently. Would you read the list out loud? She asked. Just once. Jacob looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in months he said, yeah, I think I can. Things didn't transform overnight. There was no grand declaration, no sudden wave of intimacy that solved everything. But something began to shift. After Jacob read the list aloud, 53 small reasons he had once loved her, each more specific than the last. Natalie didn't speak, she just listened. And when he finished, she didn't apologize again. She simply whispered, I remember that girl. I want to find her again. Jacob didn't promise her anything, but he stayed. That was enough. Over the next few weeks, they moved carefully. Natalie kept showing up. She didn't overwhelm him with affection. She didn't demand forgiveness. She simply remained present in ways she hadn't before. She asked questions, real ones, about his day, his thoughts, how he was feeling. At first, Jacob gave short answers, unsure if she'd keep listening, but she did. One night, they watched a movie together. One of the old ones, the kind they used to make fun of for the cheesy dialogue and bad lighting. And for the first time in a long time, they laughed at the same moment. It was small, but it was real. Jacob found himself watching her more, not because he was trying to catch her slipping, but because he was trying to recognize who she was becoming. And she was different. Not completely, not radically, but enough that he noticed she was trying. Not for show, not for a reaction, but because she wanted to reconnect. They didn't talk about the future much. Neither of them wanted to rush it, but the routines they'd lost were slowly returning. Coffee in the morning, walks after dinner, shared space that didn't feel forced. Then one Sunday, without planning it, Natalie said, let's get out of here. Where? Anywhere. Just somewhere we haven't been. Jacob was hesitant. They hadn't traveled together since before things got bad, but something in her tone felt different. Not like she wanted to escape, but like she wanted to restart. They packed a few bags and drove west. No itinerary, no hotel booked, just a map, an old playlist, and a quiet hope that maybe being somewhere new could give them space to breathe. The road was quiet at first. Natalie navigated while Jacob drove. At one point, construction forced a detour. Jacob sighed, already irritated, but Natalie laughed and said, guess we're not lost, just rerouted. He almost smiled. Almost. They ended up on the Oregon coast in a quiet town where no one asked questions, and the motels still used actual keys. They found a diner with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone hon. Natalie ordered pancakes again. He teased her for it. She didn't defend herself, just smiled. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't tense. That evening, they walked along the beach. There was no music, no big conversation, just the sound of the waves and the occasional word or two. As they walked, she reached for his hand. Not a test, not a plea. Just a quiet, steady gesture. He let her. That night in the motel, they talked. Not about blame or history, but about things they missed. About when they first moved in together. About the time they stayed up till 3 a.m., watching documentaries they didn't understand. About how easy it used to be to just exist together. I thought love was supposed to be work, she said, lying on the bed. But maybe it's really about choosing someone again and again, especially when it's not easy. Jacob sat beside her. It's both, work and choice. But it only matters if both people are doing it. She nodded. I wasn't. You are now. They didn't say, I love you. Not yet. They weren't rushing, but in the way they moved. Sharing space, finishing each other's thoughts, sitting in silence without discomfort. It was clear something had been rebuilt. Not perfectly, not completely, but honestly. They stayed another night, then drove home. On the way back, they stopped at a small market and picked up snacks for the road. Natalie grabbed his favorite chips. Jacob reached for her favorite chocolate without thinking. Those were the moments that mattered most. Not the beach, not the motel, not the pancakes, the small details that showed they were paying attention again. Back home, life resumed, but it was different. Jacob didn't flinch when she touched his arm. Natalie didn't shrink when he asked for space. They disagreed sometimes, but the silence that followed wasn't filled with avoidance anymore. It had room for repair. One night, weeks after their trip, Natalie sat beside him on the couch and said, I know we're not where we used to be, but I like where we're going. He looked at her. Not the version of her he had missed, but the person she was now. Aware, trying, honest. Yeah, he said. Me too. 3 months passed. There was no dramatic turning point. No perfect day that marked a full recovery. What they had now wasn't about sudden passion or dramatic reconciliation. It was steadier, quieter, more intentional. Natalie kept showing up, not just physically but emotionally. She asked questions and waited for the answers. She listened even when it was uncomfortable, and Jacob, little by little, began to soften. He started inviting her into his day again, shared more about work, laughed a little more, began sitting closer. It wasn't a performance. It was the result of feeling safe again. They didn't forget the past, but they didn't live there either. The relationship they were building now was rooted in presence. If one of them seemed off, the other noticed and asked. If there was silence, it wasn't avoidance. It was space. Then one quiet Sunday morning, they were having coffee together when Natalie set her cup down and said, Let's go somewhere. Where? Doesn't matter, just to us. Jacob didn't hesitate. He grabbed the keys. They packed lightly and drove out without a destination. Somewhere between the forested highways and the sleepy coastline, they landed in a small town again. Not for nostalgia, but because it felt right. They stayed in a place with creaky floors and a view of nothing special, and it was exactly what they needed. That night, after a long walk, Natalie said something that stayed with Jacob. I used to think love was effort, checking boxes, doing the right things, but now I think it's mostly about presence, being here even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Jacob nodded. He didn't need to add anything. She'd said it exactly right. On the drive back, Natalie turned to him and asked, Do you ever wish we could go back? Jacob thought about it, then shook his head. No, I don't want to relive anything. I just want to keep moving forward. With you. That honesty, simple and unfiltered, was more meaningful than any romantic declaration. At home, they picked up where they'd left off. Not from before everything broke, but from this new chapter. It was slower, more deliberate. There were boundaries, mutual accountability. If one of them felt disconnected, they said so. If one needed space, it was respected. They had learned the cost of silence and wouldn't pay it again. Natalie began therapy, not because Jacob asked her to, but because she wanted to understand herself better. She started to take ownership of the patterns she'd fallen into. Jacob noticed the difference. She didn't just react anymore. She reflected. Jacob, for his part, began to let his guard down. He stopped waiting for her to fail. He let himself believe that this version of Natalie wasn't temporary. One evening after dinner, Natalie stood at the sink, rinsing plates. Jacob came up behind her, not in a romantic gesture, but as a quiet moment of connection. You know, he said, I still remember every word of that conversation in the break room. She paused but didn't look back. So do I. I said it because it was true at the time. I know, she said, and it woke me up. They stood there, the sound of water between them, Then Natalie dried her hands, turned around, and looked him in the eye. Do you still feel alone? Jacob shook his head. Not anymore. She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders releasing just a little. I don't take that for granted, she said. Later that night, Jacob asked her something he hadn't asked in a long time. Do you want to come to bed early? Just lie there. No distractions, just us. She nodded. They didn't talk much that night. They didn't need to. Just lying side by side, breathing in sync, was enough. It was a small act, but it marked something important. Not a return to what they were, but a commitment to who they were becoming. They didn't need fireworks. They didn't need to erase the past. What they had now was more valuable. Honesty, accountability, and the will to keep choosing each other every day. For Jacob, the lesson was simple. Love without effort becomes assumption. And assumption is where invisibility begins. For Natalie, it was harder to admit. She'd taken for granted that love meant never having to prove it. She now knew better. Love wasn't guaranteed. It was a choice, made in the quiet, in the small gestures, in the hard conversations. They had walked to the edge of disconnection, and instead of jumping, they turned around. Together. If there was a moral to their story, it wasn't about dramatic gestures or grand apologies. It was about presence, about catching yourself before the damage becomes irreversible, about noticing the slow drift before it turns into a split. They learned to speak again, not just to talk, but to hear, and in that they found something worth holding on to. Not perfect love, but real love.